working. So I look forward to hearing all the things which I have experienced and learnt about and heard from these guys over the last 3 years, but also to see it all as one coming together at this almost end point of the Pioneer. So I'll stop talking. I'll just hand over to Morven and just say that there will be some time for discussion, and we will try our best to make sure that everybody's questions get a good airing and that we have some discussion time. But if not, we will note your discussions if you write them in the chat, and we'll try and deal with them afterwards. Thank you.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Morven Robertson. I hope everyone can hear me. Please tell me if you can't. So I'm Morven Robertson, and I work for the marine conservation charity Blue Marine Foundation, and I will be presenting today alongside James Stewart from the Devon and Severn Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority. Together, both of our organisations with the North Devon Biosphere have been working to deliver the North Devon Marine Pioneer Fisheries section for the last few years, which has been an incredible experience. And we've been very lucky to work with a number of collaborators who have supported our work at various stages. Today is an opportunity for us to tell you what we've done, and also what we think we've learned from the process and what we think the implications are for management, not just at the North Devon scale, but around the UK and further afield. We really feel that what we've learned is extremely applicable, and we really want to see our lessons and the things that we need to happen to really see effective, sustainable, viable, flexible fisheries that kind of coexist with conservation and all the other competing industries kind of come together and work together for future generations. So if there's anything that's unclear, let me know, but as Aisling says, at the end there'll be some time for questions. So to just set the scene slightly, James, you will have to switch to the next slide for me because I've not got control over this. But just to set the scene for everyone, we are really entering a new era of fisheries policy and governance. So the Marine Pioneer was really timely in terms of fisheries, with us now looking at a kind of post-Brexit environment and the challenges, but also loads of opportunities that that's bringing. And the government has really stepped up to this challenge and set an ambition to become a global leader in fisheries management. And they really need to deliver this, not just because the situation is changing with the way that we manage our seas and the different commitments that we are bound by, but we are really struggling beneath the waves. Our fish stocks and biodiversity are declining. This is exacerbated by climate change, and there are many pressures affecting the marine environment, from overfishing to other industries that use it. So this, really couldn't have come at a better time for us, and it's been an incredible opportunity to share ideas really at a grassroots level and see how they can be applied. So to just kind of tell you all, I'm sure you're all very aware of where North Devon is, and you've had an introduction to the Marine Pioneer. James, if you could click to the next slide. But it covers an expansive area, really big. So the Marine Pioneer in total is over 5,000 kilometres, so 5,500 kilometres in total. And most of this covers the sea. It encompasses some really important ports in the southwest, which includes Ilfracombe, Appledore and Bideford, Clovelly, and smaller fishing communities that are still using traditional methods such as Minehead. And it's quite an interesting site because of its scale. It covers two management boundaries. So we've got the IFCA, Devon and Severn IFCA managing inside the 6, and the MMO outside the 6. So it really gives us a really good opportunity that you don't often find, to have a look at how management and different management mechanisms operate over a very big scale and the kind of challenges that come with that. So it was a really interesting site. It's huge, so it's been interesting, and we've not only got the fishermen from those ports that we've been engaging with and having to consider when we've been coming up with ideas and looking at various options, but we've got fishermen that come from Wales, fishermen coming up from Cornwall, in Padstow, Port Isaac, and even some fishermen from the EU that will come up to the kind of 6 nautical mile boundary. So lots of different people to consider, and quite a busy marine space. And also, I guess what's important to note is each of the ports are very different. Like many fisheries around the UK, it's quite shellfish dominated, you know, fisheries going after non-quota species because they're easier to access. And there has definitely been a shift from kind of mobile fishing into more static fishing methods over the years. There's one fishing association, which some of you might be aware of, the North Devon Fishermen's Association, which has lots of fishermen part of it, but not all. So it's quite, yeah, and the kind of main species, as I said, shellfish, lots of rays, so it's a very important ray fishery, flatfish such as sole, dogfish, bass, and the kind of main shellfish species are lobster, crab and whelk. So yeah, I hope that's kind of set the scene for everyone. And so yeah, we all came together. There's lots of us working at different levels with different skills, and really what we wanted to do through the Pioneer in terms of fisheries was to prove a model of co-management using fisheries, science, management partnerships to improve knowledge of stocks and marine ecosystems, particularly for data poor inshore species, and improve trust between all of these stakeholders and test new approaches to management that can be implemented not only at a regional scale but inform national policy. So one of the first pieces of work that we were very lucky to feed into and have really benefited from was a big piece of work undertaken by SWEEP, which if any of you joined the webinar yesterday, you would have learnt about. They carried out a big marine asset and risk register. We also set up Fisher Science and Manager partnerships. This was really trying to get down on a level with fishermen that was appropriate for them, meeting them at the right times of the day and learning what they wanted. You know, what did they want for management? What were their challenges? What did they hate in fisheries management? What did they really like? And this was complementing the Marine Pioneer workshops that had widened the net even further, so taking into account all the different people who use the Marine Pioneer and value it. Alongside this, we commissioned a series of independent reports by the New Economics Foundation, which I'll talk about. And all of this work, when we brought it together, helped us as a group build consensus around a series of demonstrator projects that we have gone on to do, which have tried to test our ideas and see whether they'll work and what the implications are. And through all of this, we really want to be coming up with ideas that are realistic and can actually work. So, you know, all of this we hope can be taken on and not just kind of put on a shelf somewhere. So just to kind of very quickly go through what some of the main takeaway things were for us when it came to the fisheries outputs and the kind of habitat work that was undertaken through the Natural Capital Asset and Risk Register. It really demonstrated that commercial fisheries in North Devon are dependent upon a really wide range of marine habitats, from not just inshore reefs, but muds and sediments. We've got a lot of fish like rays and herring that don't, you know, maybe use habitats that sometimes get forgotten when we, you know, are managing marine protected areas. So it's been a really important case study to highlight their importance and their kind of need for management around them. We also saw that it was, there was a huge economic value derived from the fishing industry from this area, and it's really influenced by the quality of these habitats. So we really need to make sure that juvenile and key life history stages are protected and recognised. And I think what it really showed, this piece of work, that a lot of these areas have still not been mapped. So there's a huge need for evidence, and I think a lot of our work has looked towards, can we implement regional approaches to fisheries management? And a lot of that is completely dependent on having data sets that you can really rely on. So in order to do that, we really identified a gap and a need to do more research so that we can really manage at the scale that we want to. We found that a lot of the data sets that were out there, and this is something that NEF reports also picked up on, a lot of our data sets don't match up, they're not in harmony. So we were getting different kind of stock, different landings data from the MMO as opposed to the IFCA, so that also created quite a big challenge. And it also identified that a lot of the habitats that were very important for species could still be subject to human pressures, and this might not only just be from unsustainable fishing, but also other activities that could be taking place. So it's been a really good project for us to not just look at fishing pressures, but manage everything together as one. So that was a piece of work that was done, and then we moved on to really trying to come up with a way that we could ensure that fishermen engage and have a say in management. So I don't need to tell all of you that quite often management decisions get made, and the people whose livelihood depend on them don't always feel like they've been involved, or it hasn't been carried out at a scale that they can really engage with and get on board with. So we were very sensitive to that, and we really wanted to ensure we gave all fishing communities a chance to have their say. As I said a bit earlier on, all the ports are very different. They all fish their kind of key fisheries, and the way they fish and the patterns and the seasons differ quite dramatically. So we took the decision to set up meetings at each port, usually in the evening. So fishermen were back from fishing, we bought them a drink, a pasty, and sat down and had quite tailored discussions about what were some of the problems, what are things that they fear for, what are things in the future that make them worried, what are things that they think could happen, what are opportunities they would like to see, are there any research or management interventions that they would like to see. And this work was really useful, and when we brought it all together, which I'll touch on in a bit, really found that it completely ground truthed a lot of these recommendations or bits of independent work like the sweep reports and the NEF work. So it was really good, and I think what we're trying to do at the moment is formalise these partnerships so that we can make it more of a structured thing that happens more regularly, and the idea is to try and not just have fishermen and managers, but the appropriate scientists in the room. So, one of the biggest things that came out of these discussions was fishermen see lots of spurdog on the ground. Obviously, at a national level, spurdog is extremely endangered and there's no tack for it. But having, we've really tried to get the right scientists in the room to have those discussions so fishermen understand the science that's coming down from management, because quite often management advice is set at such a large scale. A small fisherman in Clovelly doesn't really understand why he's kind of subject to those rules and regulations. So this piece of work has been really, really useful and has kind of started us on this path of thinking about what is community-led management, how can we involve fishermen, how can fishermen be stewards of the marine environment, all these things that are talked about in the Fisheries White Paper and the Environment Bills. So, how does that really work on the ground? So then we moved on to talking to NEF, who've obviously done an incredible amount of work around the UK at highlighting issues with quota management or data deficient stocks, or how we manage or allocate quota and rights to access, all those kinds of things. And we asked them to produce a series of reports. They're available on the North Devon Biosphere website, or I can provide them to you, just let me know. And they really tried to outline the current baseline of the fishery in the North Devon area. You know, what are the key fisheries, weight, value, how are fishing opportunities allocated, you know, how do they deal with quota, is there a lack of quota, do they need more? A lot of our fishermen are static fishermen, quite interested through the talks we had with them in ports about how can they get better money for their fish. You know, fishermen are always looking for, you know, ways to earn more money. Of course, it's their livelihood, and very interested in schemes that pay fishermen or reward fishermen for you know, contribution or commitment to conservation. So really looked at how could that happen and how could environmental criteria be used in allocation, and had a really close look at how fisheries management is funded. And I'll talk a bit about that later on, but you know, a lot of the work through this fisheries work was undertaken by the IFCA and the Biosphere and Blue, but you know, we will not always be there. And how do you make a self-sustaining fisheries management model? Because these things cost a lot of money. You know, even some of the kind of small scale fisheries work we've done costs a lot of money. So we thought about a lot of that and used all of this to try and outline different community co-management models, looking at what's worked elsewhere, to give some guidance on possible governance and some of the opportunities and barriers that come along with these. So they're really incredible reports. I really recommend you read them. They're very applicable, not just for North Devon, but elsewhere. And they've fed into a piece of work that NEF is currently doing with MRAG, which is looking to see if we can define low impact fishing. And that's a piece of work with DEFRA. So we're within the Pioneer and for Blue and the work we do elsewhere, very interested to see what comes from that work. So taking all of these bits of work and pulling them together, it was really clear that there were some common themes. You know, a lot of the fishermen are reliant on potting, which makes them worried that if, you know, as we see around the UK, crab not doing that well at the moment, you know, lobster, what will happen with that? So it was you know, very clear that a lot of the fishermen feel quite vulnerable and they don't feel they're able to diversify. Really identified through all of the work that there's conflicting data, and we're not very sure whether we can have confidence in these data sets. Definitely not confidence enough to start managing at the scale we would like to do. But there was huge support for regional fisheries management. Fishermen really, you know, lit up at the idea of being able to take part in these discussions and really wanted to see more of this. There was a lot of discussion around MPA effectiveness, and do the MPAs that are within the North Devon Marine Pioneer area at the moment actually deliver for fish, especially? Do they encompass all the essential fish habitat? And you know, could we be looking to other spatial management tools or management methods to ensure that we've got more in our toolbox for conservation and fisheries management other than MPAs? And we're also suffering, you know, from a declining fishery. Many fishermen in North Devon are looking to retire. There's not many new people coming in. Personally, over the last 3-4 years, you know, we were involved slightly before the Pioneer as well. Every time I turn up in the pub in Clovelly or Ilfracombe, there seems to be another fisherman who's disappeared, and that's extremely sad that many people are giving up, you know, and I think that needs to be something that's addressed in North Devon. Otherwise, we are facing an uncertain future. So we took all of these together, each data set and thing kind of ground truth the other, which was really good. And what we did was then try and build consensus around a number of demonstration projects that the fishermen, really led by the fishermen, wanted to do, but supported by the managers, scientists, and people like Blue. And we conducted a few, and I'm going to pass you over to James, who's going to tell you a little bit about our herring demonstrator project now.
Thank you, Morven. So I'm just going to talk to you briefly about the Bristol Channel Herring Project. It's a project in which we used fishermen's knowledge basically to guide the science that was going on, with the hope to sort of feed that into management. So in this project, as I say, we used the fishers' knowledge to guide the science and increase our knowledge of a key stock in an area with really quite heavy development pressure as well as fishing pressure. Now, the stocks of herring around the UK, and particularly in the Celtic Seas region, which is, I guess, our local region, are under really quite heavy pressure from fishing, marine developments, and from gravel extraction. Now this has left the Celtic sea stock particularly in quite a poor condition. These fish are assumed to spawn in areas away from the Severn Estuary and the Bristol Channel, but we had contact from these local fishermen in the Marine Pioneer area who basically believed that herring were spawning locally off the North Devon and North Somerset coast. Now these fishes are part of a small-scale herring fishery which has been operating locally for many generations now, and it's their knowledge that's been incorporated to inform the research, which has happened with partners at Swansea University. Now they've been using genetics and other measurements of fish to investigate the stock structure and the spawning state of herring in the Bristol Channel. Now that research has had a lot of really interesting outputs, including that there are two distinct stocks that use the area just around Clovelly, which, as Morven said, is in the Marine Pioneer area, and that one of these stocks is really different from all the other stocks along the coast. Now that includes the Celtic sea stock. Now this research is essentially suggesting site fidelity of these fish and a stock structure that isn't actually accounted for in the current stock assessments, the quota setting or the fisheries regulation. And the hope really is to take this kind of information forward to a more regional approach to managing fisheries. So the next phase for the research itself is to identify and map the spawning areas and develop recommendations for management both of fisheries and of other activities that can impact these fish, including things like gravel extraction and marine renewable energy activities. Oh yeah, I should just say that, so on the left-hand circle indicates the area around Clovelly, and then on the right-hand circle up on the North Somerset coast, that's well, we've been sampling around Minehead for the herring. But now I'll just give you an overview of some of the actions that are required based on the Marine Pioneer experiences, followed by suggestions about how they might be tackled to leave the marine environment in a better state than we found it, and to improve fisheries and marine management. So one of the key takeaways really is that these inshore fisheries are really place and community based, but they're characterized by a lot of flexibility, for example, in how they catch their fish, what they can catch, and how they operate in terms of seasonality and whether they work full, part-time. But the key thing is that these fishes really need to be supported by flexible and responsive management. And a key lesson is that really we should be using an ecosystem-based approach to this management, both of fisheries and the marine environment in general. Now this really should prioritise the protection of natural assets, which you heard a lot about from Sian yesterday, and a management that provides enough resources to fund and reward sustainable fishing practices. As I say, it's important that these fisheries aren't managed in isolation and that they're considered alongside other impacts on the marine environment. We found that really the current scale of stock assessments aren't always appropriate for management at the variety of scales at which fisheries occur. So there's a strong suggestion that stock assessments really should be realigned, and that's something that's really come out of the herring project. Now, similarly, the current jurisdiction boundaries aren't always appropriate for the management of stocks and for enforcement of fisheries regulations. That's something that Morven particularly will talk about later in terms of a effort limit trial in the Marine Pioneer area. So first I'd like to talk a bit more about how we can deliver the ecosystem approach and what needs to change to enable that. To have whole system management, really all strands of management need to be understood to give more of a strategic view over the marine environment. Now this is obviously also consistent with an ecosystem approach to fisheries management, which has been outlined in the 25-year environment plan. Now, natural capital, which again you heard about from Sian, has emerged as a connector among these different management strands. But natural capital alone, we feel, won't deliver the commitments of the 25-year environment plan. That's in part because the current management systems aren't really conducive to delivering this ecosystem approach or to maintaining and improving natural capital assets. And we'll talk a bit more about that. Finally, on this one, another issue that's been raised really is that these so-called low biodiversity ecosystems, including soft sediment habitats, aren't really recognized and often not protected, despite providing essential fish habitat, particularly for finfish and for some other species. These habitats exist both inside and outside the marine protected area network, but really they need to be protected overall to achieve this ecosystem approach to fisheries management. So as part of this ecosystem approach, we need to think a bit more about how to integrate fisheries management and marine management more generally. Now, both natural capital and this ecosystem approach really should underpin and be central to future fisheries and marine management, including the kind of broader human dimensions, which include both the independent and the in combination effects of human activities, such as aggregate dredging, renewable energy infrastructure, and also things like eutrophication from terrestrial sources, which have a knock-on effect on the marine environment. There are also recommendations that we need to think beyond marine protected areas and integrate with other forms of management. And in doing this, we really need to consider what other policy tools and changes could be leveraged to secure future benefits for fisheries and for the environment in general. So fisheries research and management plans have been requested. Essentially, they should be developed that look at species targeted both by commercial and recreational fishing, but also species that are important for the ecosystem functioning in general. And I'll talk a bit more about this on a slide in a few slides' time. So the next point is that really environmental criteria should be applied to all fishing opportunities to ensure that the health of natural capital is maintained and that we can maximize the sustainable flow of ecosystem services. And finally on this, fishers really often regard themselves as stewards of the marine environment and feel they need to be treated as such in terms of the management. Now, the fisher science and manager partnerships that Morven mentioned, this model provided fishermen with more of an opportunity to engage with and participate in the management of their fisheries at a slightly more appropriate scale. And we feel this is a kind of model which could be replicated elsewhere and gives fishers this opportunity to really be engaged with the fisheries in their area. On this point of fishers as stewards of the marine environment, one of the other recommendations which has come out of some of the NEF work is that perhaps some quota could be reallocated to lower carbon fleets and fishing activities, and that this could really deliver additional jobs as well as saving over 600,000 tonnes of carbon per year, which obviously is a great benefit. Now, as I said, the current scale of stock assessments aren't always appropriate really for managing fisheries at the variety of spatial scales at which they occur. Unfortunately, this isn't helped in many cases by a lack of fisheries data for some stocks and areas, which really make stock assessments difficult. However, as shown by the Herring Project, fishers and their local knowledge should really play a key role in gathering some of this long-term data on fish populations, and we can use their knowledge and experience as well as involving them directly in research and management of the stocks. Another key kind of lesson learned is that these regional management approaches could be adopted and they can be informed through locally led research like the Herring Project, involving fishermen, scientists and the managers. to develop and deliver these kind of regional fisheries research and management plans, which again I'll talk about in a moment. Now, shellfish particularly could be managed at a local level. It's harder to manage finfish at a local level because of transboundary fish movements and transboundary kind of stock structure. And it's hard to unilaterally, obviously, set quotas, as the health of the stock relies on having a common limit. But it's been proposed that a way to manage this is with cooperative quotas and having these managed at the level of producer organizations. And that's something obviously that's worthy of a bit more discussion, really. Shellfish, however, can be slightly easier to manage at that local level, and that's something that Morven will talk about. So the kind of knowledge to support a more appropriate scale of assessment for integrating fisheries and marine management hopefully will be gleaned from these fisheries research and management plans. This is a project that's ongoing as part of the Marine Pioneer and is currently happening in the IFCA offices down at Devon and Severn. Essentially, these aim to define kind of an ecological baseline for the fisheries in our area. So starting with collating existing evidence on the fish stocks, reviewing their ecology and the stock status in the area, in order to basically identify species which would be suitable for this more regional, local approach to management. So as part of understanding the current system, we're looking at identifying current activities that impact on the stock. Now that, again, that's implementing an ecosystem approach that considers all the industries and activities, not just fishing. So considering all different pathways of impact, including things like aggregate dredging or marine renewables. It's also going to have a closer look at current and past management and the relevant legislation surrounding that. Through all this, we hope to highlight basically knowledge gaps and direct future research in this area, and use all of this really to set a path to local management. So exploring the additional evidence that's required to be able to manage these stocks at a more regional level, and prioritize and develop really a strategy for data collection for each species. Now the North Devon Marine Pioneer area crosses over multiple jurisdictions, as Morven said, and that includes the 6 nautical mile and 12 nautical mile limits. So a kind of unified approach across these jurisdictions using the Marine Pioneer area hopefully will deliver kind of a unified approach that can ensure any management that comes into place will be relevant and upheld at all levels within that area. I feel this is really quite a pioneering approach because actually it incorporates the local knowledge and the anecdotal information that's available there from the fishers, and including historical data. It reviews, like I say, these other ecosystem factors which might affect fish populations, and it includes the fishers' cultural and heritage values in that process as well. I think I'll leave that there and then hand over to Morven to deal with some more of the lessons we've learned from this.
Yeah, thank you, James. So what else did we learn, and what needs to be done? So I think we've really learned that, we want flexible and responsive fisheries management at a local level. Inshore fisheries in North Devon and elsewhere are place and community based, but characterised by flexibility, ability to switch species in response to changing seasons or new species emerging from maybe even climate change, changing kind of fishing distribution. They also have different fishing areas. They differ in terms of their gear types. Some of them are part-time and sell through a variety of channels. There are so many different things that that drive fisheries, especially inshore fisheries. So they need to be flexible to allow small-scale mixed fisheries to be adaptive and viable, and this should be supported, not undermined. So we really feel there needs to be big improvements to local governance. And also very clear mechanisms for allowing people, including fishermen, to take part in that governance, and ensuring there are equal, very transparent kind of representations of different stakeholders around the table. We really feel that co-management could deliver both national and local objectives and provide a culture of transparency for the industry, science and managers, and yeah, create a very flexible, adaptive management. We do also feel one of the biggest lessons we've learned is there is a lack of funding, and this impedes regional management. We need to see an improvement to fisheries governance, and this is going to cost money. At the moment, there are not enough mechanisms in place to generate funds to make things self-sustaining. Even if we want to formalise some of the partnership working that we've been doing, that's going to require funding. Carrying out research with fishermen, that requires funding. So all of these things need to be considered. One of the challenges in North Devon, it is quite an isolated place, so even finding investment can be challenging. The last lesson for me to touch on is that fisheries management really needs to be tested. We really don't want to see policy being brought in that is not relevant or doesn't suit the people who have to deal with it on the ground. The Pioneer provides a fantastic opportunity and has really provided an example of how fishermen and regulators and scientists and people like Blue can work together, hash things out, have a shout, get it wrong, but then come up with something that we maybe haven't all said it would have been our ideal, but it works for everyone and there's consensus. And I think we really need to ensure that fisheries management is completely tested through before it's adopted. So just moving on to really how can we improve local governments, how can we get to that point? I think we really need to clearly articulate formal decision-making processes and clarify how scientific information feeds into policy. It is really not clear sometimes how data that we gather on the ground is used, and it would be really useful, and through the Pioneer we've been able to do this, is sit with everyone around a table and say, if we want to change this piece of policy, what research do we need to do to satisfy the needs? And I think having more clarity around that so everyone is really aware would be very useful. And I think really making sure, and as we have done through the Pioneer, that there's this feedback loop so that we're constantly feeding back to the people who have invested time in to all of this work, so they really understand what's happened and why decisions get made. I really think that we need to take what we've done with the Fisher Science and Management Partnerships and continue this. I think they're an amazing starting point for fisheries co-management. They provide an incredible forum, and they really kind of give fishermen a real say and a voice in an environment that I think can be extremely intimidating. And I think there's a really big opportunity to kind of address the need for improved communication between local and national policymakers. So this idea of feedback, again, really meeting people on their level in an environment that they need. And I think there's a lot we can learn from this. You know, we had no idea, as James was saying, that they were observing these things with herring. We've had an enormous amount about spurdog. We hear things all the time. There's another theory in North Devon that you find lots of rays over different types of ground. You know, what can we do with this information? It is so valuable. We really need to make sure we bring it all together. And we need to make sure that wider stakeholders are really involved so that fishermen understand that there are other people who use the environment. You know, that's the natural capital approach, understanding that there are lots of different values. And I think that we need to ensure that co-management really is transparent and helps the industry, especially as we enter a new era. So to ensure that, you know, we really have management strategies that are informed, robust, and include all pathways for impact, not just those relating to commercial fin fisheries. So I think that might be everything I have to say on improving local governments. Oh, and so one of the biggest things that really came out of this that I think both of us have touched on in this pioneer is the fact that because we were working in this scale, and there are these, we've got the MMO and the IFCA and lots of fishermen and fisheries coming from elsewhere, there's a real, it really shone the light on issues that happen when you have different types of management. So, you know, a different size of crab can be caught within the 6 compared to outside the 12, or a different whelk size, and that creates a lot of problems, and it creates a lot of pressure, and really one of the biggest things we found through our work was fishermen saying we really need to start managing at an appropriate scale. And I think the pioneer, because of its size, gave us an amazing opportunity to really look at that and talk to everybody. And I think one of the recommendations we had was looking at whether regional IFCAs could expand out to the 12 nautical mile boundary to try and harmonise marine and fisheries management, so that the same management is in place across the board at the scale that not just fishermen fish at, but at the scale that stocks move around and do their own thing in the marine environment. So this has been huge for us. I think it's something that's being considered elsewhere around the UK. I know there's an enormous amount of issues even at cross-border for Scotland and England with fishermen who move over that boundary. It makes no sense for us to have management that is not consistent. It makes it difficult to manage, it makes it confusing, and you know, it also opens up lots of challenges. So how do we really test these ideas then? You know, if we want to expand out to the 12, how do we do that? And I think it's been an amazing opportunity through the Pioneer to really have a conversation with DEFRA, MMO and others who are involved in this, and the people would have to open up those policy mechanisms for us to do these things. So what we've really tried to do is start this with a specific demonstrator project, which we are still in the development phase of. If you go to the next slide, James, and this has been around the idea of seeing if we can work with fishermen to come up with a regional effort limit trial. So at the moment, like many inshore areas of the UK, there is a big concern over the levels of potting. Many people feel there are too many pots. Lots of the local boats in North Devon fish small amounts of pots, maybe 300, 500, but you've got lots of other boats that come in from elsewhere who fish much higher levels, and in some cases, you know, there are reports of 2,000 to 3,000 pots, and this kind of effort changes across the area. So we really tried to bring fishermen together. They were all very interested in they're very concerned about the stocks for crab and lobster and even whelks, and we have tried to over the last year discuss different management measures. You know, this is very difficult because of the scale we're working at, and you've got fishermen who are making a living at very different scales. Some people have to fish quite high levels, you know, to make a living, and we need to respect that. But we've really tried to pull together local aspirations for a trial. And this has been really quite interesting for us, because this is where we feel the Pioneer has the opportunity, because we are all working as a group with DEFRA and the MMO, we have that ability to bring everyone together and try something really new and innovative. So at the moment we are proposing we would do an effort limit trial all the way out to the 12, could bring in management for the entire area. And this would require development of legislation with the MMO and even Wales. And we even have some French boats. So at the moment we're at the stage where we have spoken to the shellfish team at DEFRA and others. We've come up with a kind of starter for 10 plan, and our next step was really to go back to the fishermen and start hashing out the different types of management measures that could be included in this. Unfortunately, with the current situation and the fact we cannot leave our houses, this is going to push back this timeline. But what we really want to do this because this is something the fishermen really want to do, and if we did it, I think it would be a game changer, especially as we leave the EU. It would really provide an opportunity to explore how we can redraw the management boundaries. But again, all of this will need funding, so that, you know, that's something to consider. So moving on to the next one, perhaps the most challenging, or the one that's been quite interesting, especially from my own perspective as an NGO being involved in this. You know, we have provided lots of match funding because we really believe in this project and it has relevance across the UK. But it's been, you know, through the work with NEF, we really tried to drill down into how can we address the problems of funding fisheries management. How can we ensure we've got enough funding there for enforcement, management, research, and engaging people on the level that's required? You know, what does it take to deliver co-management? And so through the NEF work, they came up with a number of things that could be looked at, some of which are probably quite contentious to fishermen and other people. But one of the ideas was, could we, Devon and Severn IFCA, look to increase the charge for their permits? I know other IFCAs have done this. You know, rather than charging a nominal fee, could it be more in line with what they're actually doing within the district? You know, how big is their effort, or what is their impact on the marine environment? Another option would be to look at local taxes at the county council and local authority level. You know, increasing the level of council tax receipts to fund fisheries management could be possible, although it might be politically difficult given the impacts of austerity on councils' wards and the demands they are under, especially at the moment. Another idea was to look at access fees and user charges. So, you know, this was really teased out in output 2 of the NEF reports, which again, I recommend you all have a read on who gets to fish. You know, how do we allocate fishing, access to fishing? Can it be based on environmental criteria or low impact fishing? Could we, you know, charge people more based on their kind of gear type or vessel power to try and create a low impact fishery? You know, what are the reward schemes involved in that? We also looked at landing tax for the North Devon Marine Pioneer ports, looking at different ways we could do that, looking at increasing membership for the Fishing Association locally. And I guess one of the interesting things is, how can we use proceeds from fishing related crimes? How can we feed that back into ensuring that our marine environment is managed sustainably and the habitats that everyone depends on are kind of safeguarded? So, and as James mentioned, there was a kind of discussion about quota reallocation to lower carbon fleets. So all of this kind of feeding into a new fisheries management model that maybe, given the fact there are not as many mobile fishermen, there's only 2 in the kind of ports. This is important, I guess, because there are lots of people who come into that area. But from the home ports in North Devon, there are only 2 trawlers and no other mobile fishermen. So there is an opportunity to really look at a low impact fishery for this area. So next slide, I think. So bringing all of this together, we hope that what we've done has come across well. We think we've done, and you know, it's been an amazing experience. And I think, you know, post Pioneer, we've got the effort limit trial, the next stages of the herring, and we are looking to formalise the partnerships we've set up with fishermen. And I think that's the most important thing, making sure that all the effort that they've put in to really be a part of this journey and part of the Pioneer is not lost. I really think it has a future, and the work that we're doing here will continue. I hope that the lessons we've put across are clear, and I think Aisling might say a bit more about this, but we will be putting this into a document that will be available for everyone, and of course all the reports are available online. And we really think that this can be rolled out and applied to other areas. Blue's already working with lots of other fishing communities that are saying just the same things as the fishing communities here, so these lessons are far reaching. So maybe James, if you have anything else that you would like to say, or Aisling, I'll hand it over to you guys, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Morven and James. James, did you want to say anything?
I think that covers it from my side as well. Thanks very much.
Well, then I just want to thank you both very much for a really interesting talk. And there, so much has gone on, and you have managed to put all of that into this presentation, and I really appreciate that. I can see that there's at least one question on the chat. I'm just going to quickly run down to see if anybody else has put their hands up. Nobody has put their hand up. So what you can do is you can actually put your hand up and I will be able to see that. Myself and Sean, who are co-hosting, will be able to see that, and we'll be able to come to you and allow you to ask a question if you want. So while everybody is figuring that out, I'm going to respond to this first question. Unfortunately, I only have your M number, but I know that you're working in the MMO. When talking about extending management measures from 0 to 12 nautical miles, have you spoken to the MMO about this? I'm part of the conservation team who's involved with fisheries management measures within MPAs. Do you have ideas about what management measures might include, e.g. minimum net sizes, closing fishing areas, etc.? And how might this be possible with the MMO who regulates 6 to 12 nautical miles? So what's happened there is that this is really looking at potting. That's where this discussion has come from. And so the idea is around managing that particular type of effort across both the IFCA and the MMO area. That has been discussed with people in the MMO, and the possibilities there are to use license variations. So the DEFRA policy team, the shellfish team, have been speaking to the marine conservation team in the MMO, and the idea is that we don't exactly know how to do it yet, but that we would work on these possibilities, that we have license variation opportunities to do that together. The whole point here would be to trial that experience of managers working together in the same space on the same regulation, and that would be the hope. So rather than having these distinct processes, that we would focus on the shared desired outcome, and that we would adjust our collective activity to achieve that. Morven and James, did you want to add to that in any way?
I don't think so. I guess only to say, if you want some further details on some of the management measures that we're thinking about or have been discussed, I'm happy to provide them, or an outline of what the project looks like at the moment.
That's great. Maybe if the person from the MMO can identify who they are.
Reveal yourself.
Yeah, then we would know who to send that information to. Or, well, obviously I can't pop up to you because we're not in the same office at the moment, but we can certainly talk about it in future.
Great.
It's Jessica. Okay, Jessica, I know who you are, and we'll be able to send you on some information, and we can talk about it in the future. So quickly moving on, since time is moving, from Stephen in Eastern IFCA. Thanks for listening in, Stephen. It's great to have you and your expertise on the call. So your question is about local management. A good idea, but do we think that fishers appreciate the difference between local management to define the goals and local management to meet the goals defined elsewhere, for example, MPAs? How did fishermen react to accepting the difference? And Morven, could you please circulate a link to the NEF reports? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll circulate the link.
Thank you. And so that first question about discussing with fishermen the difference, or accepting the difference between having an option or being involved in that setting of local goals, or having to apply the management relating to goals that have been set elsewhere. Did you have anything to say about that?
I think that obviously fishermen will put themselves first, and quite rightly, because they're making a living from the sea. But I think they were very open to the fact that there are other goals elsewhere and obligations we need to meet. And I think they actually were very forthcoming with engaging with the MPA process or other obligations. So we actually had quite a lot of really good recommendations for management that weren't necessarily going to support them, but that helped to further the kind of commitments we have through MPAs. So I found that they were quite accepting of that. I guess you never really know until you come down to agreeing a specific management measure that might hinder their ability to do something. So perhaps we haven't tested that all the way out to it becoming a reality. But I did find that a lot of them really felt in this area that MPAs were not quite there for their fish stocks, and I think they totally accepted that they're there for other marine features, and they didn't have a problem with that. But I think it was more focused, our discussions, on there is a gap in protecting essential fish habitat for their species, and I think that's not just for species, for fishermen, but it seems there is quite a gap in the MPA network in North Devon for quite a lot of habitats that are very important, especially soft sediments. Not sure I quite answered your question, but I'm happy to talk about it offline because it's a really interesting point.
Stephen, if you wanted to unmute yourself and respond to that, I'd be happy to hear your point of view too.
Yeah, hi. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Okay, hi. Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for that. Very interesting. It is just the point about you covered, that local management is obviously an excellent idea and a great principle, and to be applied as far as possible. We do our best, but there are certain things that have to be delivered. And I just wondered what your experience is of the difference between people wanting to have local management to say what they want the goals to be, and people accepting that there are goals coming from outside and being able to sort of put forward measures which may impinge on their activities to meet goals defined from outside. So MPAs is one example which springs to mind immediately. The other one is management of stocks on a broader scale, because you've quoted the example of the herring stock and the appropriate level of management, and I think it has to be done on the basis of stock rather than on the basis of administrative convenience or fishers' convenience and habits. For instance, if you have a stock which is moving from one area to another, the sensible response for fishers in a particular area is to make sure they catch all of it before it walks away or swims away. But that's not the sensible approach for the stock as a whole. So how do fishermen accept the need to deliver goals which have been defined elsewhere?
Well, I think every fisherman is different. So the herring fishermen we're working with are very conservation minded and work at such a small scale that I think that's just within their ethos. Some of the fishermen who fish at larger scales in Ilfracombe potentially don't accept that things need to be managed. The spur dog's actually a good example of that. They think they should be allowed to have a big long line fishery for spur dog, and there's no problem because they see lots of spur dog on the ground. So I think it differs between fishers. I think there's a problem with fishermen not being told what MPAs are there for and how MPAs can help them, or other commitments, or why stock levels are set at the kind of scale they are. So I think more conversations like what we've had are really the way forward if we're going to get fishermen to really understand and let them understand that they'll have to take a hit sometimes. But until we really test that all the way through to a management output that says you can't fish in this area or you can't fish this stock for certain times of the year because it's feeding into a wider goal, which we haven't quite got to yet, I'm not sure we'll really know. I imagine half the fishermen will be cool with that and the other half will go, well, jog on, so that's the same with every industry. I think,
Yes, I think that there's some adjustment on all sides probably needs to be made, and I think certainly within government organisations we probably need to think about joining up our messages a bit more across fisheries and other industries, and intersecting with climate, biodiversity, fish stocks, the kind of protection and conservation we're interested in those areas, but also with the idea that government wants people's livelihoods to be secured and for industries to carry on making money and supporting people's livelihoods. So I think there's a lot more talking to be done and a lot more explaining and including people in those discussions. I agree with what Morven is saying. Different people will react differently, but I certainly think from our point of view, we might need to adjust our approach so that we are more inclusive in our discussions, and that's not directed at IFCAs in particular, Stephen, because I think that actually a lot of IFCAs do this as a matter of course. It's your daily bread to include people, but maybe some others of us need to think more about how we pass on our messages and how we conduct our discussions so that we are including people and working with people from the beginning. If you will indulge me, I'm going to ask this other question that's on. I understand if people need to leave, but if you can stay on for a few minutes more, I'd like to introduce Chloe Smith's question. In the Southern IFCA, she says her interactions with the fishers have mostly indicated that they are concerned about the impact of climate change on crabs and lobsters rather than effort. Was this quite different in your area? Did you have any experience of fishers with this opinion? And if so, what did it take to get them on board with the idea of management measures? I think this is a really fundamental and useful question. So thanks for that, Chloe. Does anybody want to respond to that?
I can respond, but James, feel free to chip in. So all of the discussions when it came to crab and lobster were completely focused on concern about way too much potting. I hear that all around the UK, even in Southern IFCA with the fishermen we work with in Lyme Bay. I think there's a huge problem with effort and people are very concerned for the stock. I think potentially where North Devon is, just in terms of the climate there, I don't think they've really started to feel or become that aware of climate change. James, you might have heard differently, but at least from all my port discussions, it wasn't really about climate change. So it wasn't that hard to get them on board with the idea of management because it was their idea. And I think that's really important to get, hopefully our presentation got across all of the things that we've tried to do are because fishermen have said they want to do it and they're coming up with the management ideas. So, but I think climate change is definitely going to affect them. They might just not be that aware of it at the moment.
All I would add to that is that there was some kind of discussion that they're aware of these fluctuations in the level of catch that they get year on year, and that some of them are happy to attribute that to fluctuations in things like the climate. But that because these fishers, particularly on the North Devon coast, operate such small boats and can only go so far from shore or so far out into the Bristol Channel, they're quite restricted in terms of the ground they can exploit. Their concern really is about high levels of potting further out, perhaps just outside the Six, by boats from elsewhere, particularly from Europe, who can lay far more pots from much bigger boats and take the crab, let's say, before it has a chance to migrate into the inshore waters. And that's really what their concern has been, particularly because, like I say, they operate close to the shore and with fewer pots generally.
Thanks, James. And thank you very much to everyone for holding on for those extra couple of minutes. I know some people have had to leave. I just want to say again, thank you very much to Morven and James for all your work, but also for this presentation, because it is, I think, is really useful work and really helpful and is worthy of further consideration amongst many people. And we will be producing a summary of these recommendations in a final online digital format, which we can share with everybody, but which also should be searchable and findable online. We hope that that will be online towards the end of April. But in the meantime, please do feel free to contact any of us if you're looking for more information. And a couple of topics and themes that were picked up in this presentation were on funding and governance, and marine protected areas. And the next webinars in this series will be the marine protected areas one on marine protected areas and funding on Thursday, and then also the governance one on Friday. So if you're interested in those topics, please do join us again. All of these will be recorded and available in due course, so you will be able to access them in that way. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you will be well and safe in the next few days. And we appreciate you taking time to join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks very
Thanks,
much.
bye.